Hello and welcome back to another DF Direct. I'm John Lindemann and today we're here to talk about Death Stranding. I just posted my recent video review of it and there's more coming. But before that, I did want to chat about the recently announced PC version of the game. And of course, to do that, I am joined by our PC enthusiast, super expert, PC super fan, Alex Battaglia.
Thanks for introducing me, John. Yeah, like you, coming off this announcement, I wasn't really sure what to think because it was coming right before the PlayStation 4 release was, going to happen. And usually you expect companies wanting people to quote unquote double dip. So I actually find this a very kind of pro-consumer move in general, beyond the whole technical aspects, which we'll get into later. But I'm very happy to hear games coming out before it actually does come out, so you can make the choice.
Yeah, it's a weirdly transparent, open thing, I'd have to say.
Right?
Since this is borderline a first-party, I mean, it is a first-party title, but Kojima Productions is independent, but more than 70 or so people from Guerrilla Games worked on this title. So it's kind of almost a co-production between the two studios. But as we've seen with stuff like the Quantic Dream games, there's some Sony first-party games arriving on PC as of late, which I think is a forward-looking thing. It's great that more people can experience this stuff.
Yeah, I think it kind of ties back into the idea that they don't view necessarily the PC platform as a competitor for the console space, rather just kind of like something that is on the side that has its own dedicated market, much like the handheld market.
Exactly, and at the same time, clearly they're not sacrificing anything by doing this, in the sense that the console PlayStation versions look absolutely incredible. I think it's one of the best looking games I've seen this generation. And it's a mix of tech and art, obviously.
That's kind of the thing that your video really showed off extremely well. It's a lot of tried and true techniques that we've seen across this generation, especially towards the latter half of it now.
Oh yeah.
But this is kind of a game decidedly built no longer in the transitional period, only for late generation, with an engine that is definitely scaling across to PlayStation 5 and next-gen PCs.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing. So for both the PC version and PlayStation 5 games based on Decima, I think this was a great opportunity for Guerrilla Games to work with such a different type of game culture. The Kojima Productions team, they've traditionally designed things differently than maybe Guerrilla Games would have, and both studios have a strong background in terms of art direction.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
So this kind of feels like a win-win, and also the chance to build an actual PC version, even though the Decima engine has always run on PC in the background, but polishing it up, releasing it to consumers, it's a great way to also prepare for next generation machines, and generally allowing the engine to fully stretch its legs and push things to the next level. So Alex, then, based on what you've seen of the game, at least from my video, then what are the top things that you would personally like to see improved on the PC, and where do you think they could go in a reasonable time frame without what's feasible within this time frame?
I guess, we have until early summer of 2020, which is okay amount of time. I guess a lot of that time is probably going to be spent up making sure that the PC side of the engine is actually kind of performant. A lot of developers will definitely have PC versions of their even console-only engines, like exclusive engines, because that's where their tool set lives. They need to live play the game in editor and things like that. So there's definitely usually PC versions of games. But looking from beyond that, like them spending time doing that, I imagine they're gonna kind of do the same things that we see in a lot of PC versions usually, where there's incremental upgrades of things that allow them to be incremented. So things like volumetric fog, or the resolution of shadows. Like in this game, it's pretty important, like for a lot of the close-up shots of characters, both in gameplay and out of gameplay in cutscenes. I even mentioned it once in a trailer analysis video I did, where you can see the shadow map resolution on the PlayStation 4 Pro version rather often, even in cinematics, where it kind of, dithers out and you can see the edge of the individual pixels of that shadow map. That's something that I imagine as like a first initial upgrade that for a PC version that would occur, just because it's usually just, increasing a value or doubling a value from 1024 to 2048 or something like that. That's really easy stuff, and that applies to things like the volumetric fog, probably the rendering resolution of SSR, SSAO, those things can just be incrementally increased up without too much development time. It's just a matter of creating the settings menu, which supports that actually, which is a big deal. So UI front end, and the game has a very dedicated PS4 and PS4 Pro specific UI, and a lot of the gameplay mechanics too tie into that, like regarding like the whole baby mechanic, which people are probably going to be playing in the game. A lot of it's designed around the PS4 Pro and PS4 interface and how that works. So I think a lot of the development time here, beyond these incremental upgrades, is actually going to be making sure that it works in a PC native manner. It has a settings menu, and the controls actually carry across to the new platform.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And obviously, the controls, I'll be curious to see how they implement them on the PC. There are actually some motion controls in this for rocking the baby, but it's optional. You can actually already disable that if you don't want to do that.
Okay, so I'm imagining that like the mouse scroll wheel or like the mouse 4 and 5 button is probably going to become much more useful. There's no analog movement on PC without a controller, so does the game actually have analog movement?
It uses that, and it's pretty important to the movement system.
I'm imagining they're gonna probably take it Splinter Cell style, where they don't have analog movement, but they make it digital analog by allowing the scroll wheel to kind of change your movement speed. I actually like that in games when they do that.
That's a good solution, actually.
But the other thing that I noticed when watching your video, and when we get to the performance videos, like the game is targeting 30 FPS, and Decima does always a really good job of doing that. Horizon Zero Dawn before it, just like, I guess it's probably CPU limited in some scenarios, and even still GPU limited in others, depending upon what's happening on the screen, and if it's base PS4 versus PS4 Pro. But performance is probably the biggest thing, and that's just native to the engine and how fast the PCs are going to be running this game.
Yeah.
These animations at 60 are gonna look really great.
I hope we can adjust the camera shutter speed, because it is actually better than it's higher than I had hoped, in that when you're moving quickly and engaging in melee combat and the like, there is still plenty of motion blur. But I do feel if you're running at 60 frames per second or higher, it needs to be increased as well to feel effective. So maybe that'll be an option. I would like to see that.
I wonder if they're going to be doing that, though. I mean, I'd like that, obviously. But at the same time, we have kind of evidence from Kojima games on PC in the past where that was an invisible parameter that was tied into other settings. But, obviously that's a completely different engine and a completely different time frame and publisher. So we'll see what happens there regarding how much money 505 games and how much customization they're going to allow. I've been playing PC games for forever, and sometimes even the best looking games have extremely minimal, UI for settings. I'm looking at you, Metro and 4A games. But
one of the things I'm most curious about is how customizable it will be, like say at an I&I level, and what kind of stuff you can find in the directories and what sort of files are in there and what you can mess with. It's always fun on the PC being able to sort of peek behind the curtain, so to speak, and like look at some of this stuff and also potentially tweak it. Some games are better than others at this. This being a console game, maybe it won't have too much to offer in that sense, but still.
I don't know, because we have the evidence from Metal Gear Solid 5 where there's a lot of mods for that game being more or less kind of locked behind a box. There's scripts left behind that can be unlocked and things like that, where people exchange out models and even exchange out gameplay mechanics and things like that based upon this. And those are pretty clever mods, and if we saw something similar like that, even on Decima, I'd be very happy, but also pleasantly surprised. I don't expect that necessarily.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But in terms of graphical things that I've always noticed in the game that could perhaps be better, depending upon how much time they have and how much of the code base is actually going to be changed, because Decima is an engine that is not only targeting PS4, but is now in the transitional period, definitely has probably been having R&D in the back end for presumably Horizon Zero Dawn 2, which is probably in production, I'd imagine. Them pushing that over to PS5 and then changing engine assets and engine effects so that they look better. And one of the ones that I would imagine that they would probably want to do is changing the game's SSR. Not because it's bad looking or something like that. It's just using a very, I would say, quote unquote, cheap version of SSR that was developed, kind of right at the beginning of this generation when SSR was really new. It doesn't have a lot of the kind of photorealistic aspects, like in terms of reflection, stretching.
Weirdly enough, actually, the solution used in Killzone Shadowfall was more robust, I think, at least visually, compared to what we ended up with in Horizon.
Yeah, right.
And Death Stranding, even, where they sort of would trace the reflections in a lot of detail.
Yeah.
And you could actually see more of the cutoff point was less restrictive. Yeah. Where here, well, especially in Horizon, it did kind of feel like it just sort of, it wasn't very effective in those large bodies of water. And it's much better in Death Stranding. I think you can still see the edges, but I think they arted it up better to avoid some of those limitations. And also, it's just a better implementation of the water in general.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's also other materials that use SSR as well, like the metallic stuff. And
so, like, that's the area where I'd say the SSR that the game currently has fails more often to look realistic, because the way, I mean, just to get into it technically, the way it works is it doesn't actually take, like, the PBR values of the material to scale the SSR on it. Rather, it's kind of a Gaussian chain or bitmap chain. So it doesn't actually respect the material's like surface value when SSR is applied to it for like more dull metals. But for things like extremely polished metals and extremely like reflections in water or puddles, those will always look really good. But I imagine if they're transitioning to next gen, basically they would go towards what I would say is more industry standard now, where it's like a stochastic method of SSR that respects the material surface, and it is more randomized. It could be a little bit more noisy, but we're talking about PS5 here. It's probably going to be a very powerful GPU in there.
No, it's very interesting to see. You're right, because we don't actually know what platform this next Horizon game will ship on. In my mind, I'd like to think that they're targeting PlayStation 5. Yeah. Maybe that's the case or not, I'm not sure. Maybe it'll be cross-gen, but either way, it does kind of feel like working on this project was probably a great chance for them to sort of continue to refine the engine, and bringing it to the PC will let them play around with, possibly further enhancing some of those features. Yeah. We'll see. Like, it could be like a stepping stone for what they're doing on PS5, even a chance to ramp up a few things or test a few new visual features, perhaps. Hard to say, but I do see some potential there.
Yeah, and like another area that I've noticed beyond the way SSR looks, and it's a general thing. I don't imagine this will change necessarily unless they actually are going to be integrating a lot of things from like what is a quote-unquote PS5 version of their engine. But it's kind of in scenes where it's overcast and in scenes where something is already in shadow, a lot of the materials that are metal or plastic or even the underside of rocks kind of glow.
Yeah, that's a common issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a common rasterization issue. It's just there's not a lot of good ways to make it so that you can have indirect lighting for specular elements, that is for shiny elements, but also have it so that they don't glow in shadow. It's really hard to do. I'm not exactly sure how they do it. The obvious way to do it is by introducing elements of ray tracing into the engine, but come on, we only have how many months till summer? I don't know if that's a thing that even exists.
In Horizon, they just did the typical, they baked out all the lighting, but they did like 6 bakes.
Yeah, right.
To fill in the full time of day, and they kind of designed a system to smoothly transition between them. But obviously, it's not going to be as pixel accurate as you could get with a proper ray trace solution. So you do have the issues with some of those regions, the shattered regions sort of glowing, as you say, and I don't think that's going to change. Ray tracing would be an amazing thing to see, although, I mean, I could see them sort of marketing like, hey, this is a preview of ray tracing on PlayStation 5 or something.
Apparently they're confident enough in the game to allow this even happening. The one thing I always kind of imagine when they would release a game on PC, and especially it's a PS4 exclusive, would be, it takes a little bit of the thunder out of a next-gen game, unless next-gen games are like really different graphically.
They probably won't be.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's surprising at the same time, and I don't expect, as much as I would love it, I don't expect massive engine overhaul changes to make things that are problems in rasterization go away through utilizing things like ray tracing.
It's a pretty basic thing then. Those types of improvements seem reasonable. I don't think we're going to see anything massively overhauled, but there is potential in that PC version. But it still looks great on PS4 as is. So
a good example is going to be the upcoming Red Dead Redemption. On PC, we technically have next generation features already there, but due to, even with a year of development time, we're not seeing something like ray tracing in that game. You know, why would we necessarily expect it in something like a Sony exclusive title?
But I am curious though as well. I mean, as a PC gamer, when you watched the video on it, I mean, what were your thoughts in general about the presentation? I already shared my thoughts, obviously.
Like you, I think the thing that catches my eye the most are the character models. They are so well done, to the point where I do wonder how much of the budget in terms of like time, money, and everything went into that before they even had gameplay set out. You know, like because they look so good, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of research and all these things. So that's like where they probably spent a lot of it.
And how about the eye materials and the way they render light around the eyes?
Those are good. Those are great. Like I did mention in my trailer, but like the Die Hard Man character, whose name I'll never understand, of course, until I play the game.
It's an amazing name.
But his eyes, kind of like the combination of materials on that character model with the way they set it up in cutscenes specifically, it looks masterful. The one thing I'm really curious about how they're doing it though is the kind of like water deformation stuff and the way kind of water rises up, or like this kind of black liquid rises up. I'm wondering how they're doing that. And, you know, obviously when we get over to PC, we'll have more time, I think, to kind of look at it under a microscope and say what exactly it's doing, depending upon what the settings allow in the game. Yeah, the one thing I'm curious about, I guess, kind of before we wrap this up, is what API it would be running on, because is it going to be a DirectX game? Will it go 11, 12, or Vulkan? I remember listening to part of the end of a QA interview regarding this, and someone from Guerrilla Games was there, and they mentioned Vulkan at one point. So maybe the back-end tools have been converted over to that or something like that. Who knows?
I could see this being Vulkan because obviously it's using the low-level API on PS4.
Yeah, it needs to, even to run and look this good.
So obviously, I mean, that's what you have to do. So, but it would make sense to me to use something like Vulkan rather than going with Microsoft's DX12.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So it's probably going to be Vulkan, I'd imagine, which would be cool.
HDR, hopefully HDR on PC. They don't mess that up.
Gosh, the HDR is tremendous in this game. Definitely one of the best implementations. I mean, this stands alongside the likes of Gears 5 and Gran Turismo Sport. There's a few other games like that where the HDR is just top tier, and I really think during my capture sessions, I had to do it in SDR, and when I switched back to HDR, like I completely sort of changed the feeling of the world in a positive way. Like it's much more dramatic in HDR, so I hope that makes it to the PC as well.
That's always kind of one of the unfortunate things about doing our reviews, is that we have to focus on the elements that can be, you know, like appreciated in a YouTube video. So we can't talk about like fine-grained red, dark detail that's really quickly moving, for example. Like Doom is going to be really hard on YouTube. We also cannot necessarily appreciate the entire wealth of the game's content in HDR or something like that, because we have to produce the video for YouTube. I hope we can somehow get around that in the future so that we can start presenting HDR video more commonly.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's going to do it for now, so we don't want to run on too long.
No.
So thanks for joining me, Alex.
Yeah, of course, John. And I'm really excited to see this, and I don't think it is going to necessarily be, because this is a very special situation regarding Kojima Studio, but I would love to see more games like this on PC, because that's you know, PC's eternity. Things last there for a long time, and we can, you know, enjoy them in 20 years from now on some crazy high-end GPU at 16K.
Exactly. 8K 60 on this game.
8K 60, baby.
It's going to be great. So, all right. Well, and if you guys enjoy this video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe. Ring the notification bell for instant updates, and of course follow us both on Twitter. And until next time, just keep on watching weird Kojima games. They can be awesome, I guess. See ya.